Hi, this is Mrs. Rodriguez with another lesson video. Today we're going to be adding fractions. So, our first set of examples are adding fractions when they have common denominators. Okay, well, if we don't know what words mean, we're not going to know how to answer the problem. So, it's important to first figure out what the words are. So, common in this case means the same or equal. Okay, and you might be wondering, well, what does denominator mean? Well, let me give an example. If we have a fraction like 3/4, okay, the top number of a fraction is your numerator. The bottom number of your fraction is your denominator. Okay, so it's saying examples of adding fractions together that have the same or equal denominators or bottom numbers. Okay, and this is important because you can't add or subtract fractions unless there's a common denominator. So let's go ahead and write that down. Must have a common denominator to add or subtract fractions. You have to have that first. So for A and B, they already have common denominators, so we're good to go. Okay, so step one, you must have a common denominator before you can add or subtract. Once you have that common denominator, you can move on to step two, and you add the numerators. Okay, step three is use the same denominator. And step four would be simplify if you can. You're not always going to be able to simplify. Okay, so here's our steps on how to add fractions when they have common denominators. All right, now last but not least, number 5 is if fractions have different signs, subtract the numerators and use the sign of the bigger number. And if you'll remember from our previous video on adding integers and decimals, it was that same rule. Okay, you subtract the two numbers and you use the sign of whichever number is bigger, and we're going to apply that to fractions as well. So let's go ahead and get started so you can see how this works. So I'm looking at A and it says 3/8 plus 2/8. Step one says we must have a common denominator to add or subtract fractions. Well, as you can see, the denominators are the same or equal, so they have common denominators. We move on to step two. Step two says add the numerators. Okay, so I have, let me change colors, 3 plus 2. That equals 5. Step 3 says use the same denominator. So if the denominator was 8, we keep the 8. 4, simplify if you can. In this case, 5/8, we can't simplify it any further, so it just stays 5/8. Step 5, if the fractions have different signs, subtract the numerators and use the sign of the bigger number. Well, in A, both fractions are positive, so we don't have to do step 5. So our answer is just going to be 5/8. Okay, let's move on to B. B is -10 25ths plus 4/25. So step 1 says must have a common denominator to add or subtract fractions. Well, if you'll look, both denominators are 25, so they have common denominators. Okay, now normally we would jump to step 2 and do the add the numerators and then use the common denominator. However, if you'll notice, the first fraction has a negative and the second fraction is a positive. So if you'll remember, up here for step 5 it said if fractions have different signs, subtract the numerator and use the sign of the bigger number. So we're going to jump to step 5. Okay, so 10 minus 4 equals 6. I've subtracted the numerators. Okay, so there's my 6. And we keep the same denominator. So instead of adding the numerators, we went to step 5, okay? But now we're going back to 3. So use the same denominator. In this case, it's 25. Simplify if you can. Well, 6 over 25, you can't simplify it any further. It's done. And then it says, use the sign of the bigger number. So in this case, 10 is bigger than 4. 10 was negative, so the answer is going to be negative 6 over 25. Okay? So if you have two fractions and they have different signs, you're going to do step 5 and then continue on with step 3. Now, what happens if we're adding fractions with different denominators? Well, we said in the first one that you must have a common denominator first before you can add or subtract fractions. So that's a problem. If they have different denominators, we have to fix that first, okay? So let's go ahead and write our steps again. So here's our steps. So step 1 is going to be find common denominator. Okay. Step 2, convert the fractions. Step 3 is going to be to go ahead and add numerators. Step 4 is going to be keep denominator. And step 5 is going to be simplify if you can. Okay. And once again, for step 3 on adding the numerators, or if fractions have different signs, once again, you will subtract numerators and use the sign of the bigger number, just like we did in step 5 above, okay? So maybe instead of saying step 5, I should do this as or, right? Or then you do this. Okay. So the first thing is to find the common denominator. So we look at our two fractions. We have a 5 for the 4/5 and we have a 3 for the denominator on the 2/3. We need to find a common denominator. So the way we do that is we find the least common multiple. So for 5 and 3, we want the least common multiple. So a number that they both, the smallest number that they both go into. And what does that mean? Well, for 5, multiples would be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on. Okay? 3's multiples would be 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, and so on. Okay, so essentially it's going to be 5 times 1, so this is going to be times, oops, let me do it with a different color. So it's going to be times 1, times 2, times 3, times 4, times 5, and then it just keeps going, right? Then it would be times 6, times 7, times 8. I'm only going to do it to 5 for this example. And then, but if I don't find a common denominator, I'm going to keep going. Okay, I'll do times 6, times 7, times 8 until I can find that least common multiple that I need. So, having said that, what do we mean by the least common multiple? Well, the smallest number that they both go into. So, we start off with 5, 3, different numbers. Okay, 10, 6. Nope, 5 doesn't go into 6, 3 doesn't go into 10. 15 and 9. 5 goes into 15. Does 3 go into 15? Well, the next number is 9, but if we look ahead, we'll notice that yes, 3 goes into 15 5 times. So that's the smallest number that they both have in common that they go into. All right. Now, once we know that, we have to move to step 2 and convert our fractions. So we have 4/5 and we have 2/3. Okay, we need to convert these fractions so that they have a common denominator. And the way we do that is we think, okay, well, if the common denominator is 15, we're looking for a number times 5 that will give us 15 on the bottom, and a number times 3 that will give us 15 on the bottom. So in 5's case, 5 times 3 gives us 15. And whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So if we're doing 5 times 3 to get 15, we have to do 4 times 3 on the top, and that's 12. Okay, now for the bottom fraction, 2/3. Well, we need 3 to turn into 15. So what did we do to 3 to make it 15? We multiplied by 5. And remember, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So 2 times 5 is 10. We have now converted both fractions. So I have over here, okay, so this turns into now being 12 over 15 plus 10 over 15. And now we can add them together. Both fractions are positive, so we can just add the numerators and we get 22 over, step 4, keep the denominator, 15, simplify if you can. Well, 22 is bigger than 15, so we call this an improper fraction when the number on top's bigger than the number on the bottom. So we can convert this to a mixed number, right, to simplify it. So how many times does 15 go into 22? It goes in there 1 time. What do we have as a remainder? Well, 22 minus 15 is 7, so we'll have 7 left over, and of course we keep that denominator the same. And our answer becomes 1 7/15. I'm going to go ahead and draw a line so you know where part B is. Okay, let's do another one where both fractions are positive. So in this case, we have example C, 3/7 plus 5 over 14. Step 1 says we have to have a common denominator. These denominators are not common. They are not the same. So we're going to have to move on to step 2, convert the fractions. Okay, so I have 7 and 14. I need to find the least common multiple. So I have my 7 and I have my 14. And I'm going to times it by 1, times it, here, let me bring that down a little bit. So I have my 7 and I have my 14. So I'm going to times it by 1, times it by 2, times it by 3, and so forth. Okay, so for 7, 7 times 1 is 7, 7 times 2 is 14, 7 times 3 is 21. Now I'm going to start my 14s. 14 times 1 is 14. Oops, take a look at this. I don't have to go any further because we just found the smallest number that they both go into, 14. So that means 14 is our common denominator. Perfect. So now I move on to converting the fractions. So 3/7 needs to turn into a fraction with the denominator as 14. So what do we do to the 7 to make it 14? Well, we multiplied by 2. Remember, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So 3 times 2 is 6. So now this becomes 6 over 14 plus, now because this fraction already had a 14 on the bottom, we can just leave it alone. It already has the denominator we need. So it's 5 over 14. Now we can move on to step 3. Both fractions are the same, so we just add the numerators and we get 11. Step 4, keep the denominator, so we're going to leave the 14 on the bottom. And then step 5, simplify if you can. So 11/14 cannot be simplified, so that's just our answer. Right, and let me go ahead and continue the line to separate B and D from A and C. Okay, so now we have 2 examples where the fractions have different signs. So let's go ahead and I will choose green again. So step 1, find a common denominator. Okay, well, 3 and 4 are not the same, so we definitely need to find that common denominator so we can convert the fractions. So in this case, we have 3 and we have 4. So we're going to go ahead and just multiply these out. Maybe you want to go up to 5 for everything just to give you a starting point. Okay, so let's go ahead and find our multiples. So 3 times 1 is 3, 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 4 is 12, 3 times 5 is 15. So now I'm going to multiply the 4 out and do the multiples of 4 and see if we have any numbers in common or the same. If we don't, that's okay. We'll just make our chart go out farther and we'll do times 6, times 7, times 8, etc. until we find a common number. So 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 4 times 3 is 12, 4 times 4 is 16, and 4 times 5 is 20. So now I look at our list and I go, okay, is there a common, oops, sorry about that. Is there a common number? Is there a common multiple so far before I extend my chart out? And I look and I see that both of them have the number 12. So 12 is our least common multiple, the smallest number that they both have in common. And that's what we're going to use as our denominator, okay? 12. So we now need to move on to step 2, which is converting the fractions. I'm going to have my 5/3. I need to change that so it has a 12 on the bottom. What do I do to that 3 to make 12? Well, we multiplied by 4. So I'm going to multiply it by 4, and that means whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So 5 times 4 is 20. Okay. Now we can convert our second fraction. We have -3/4. I need to make it so it has a denominator of 12. What did we do to that 4 to turn it into 12? Well, we multiplied by 3. So whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. And we get -3 times 3, which is -9. Okay? So now that our fractions have been converted, we now have 20 over 12 plus -9 over 12. We have our common denominators. So step 3 says add the numerators, or if the fractions have different signs, subtract numerators and use the sign of the bigger number. Okay, in this case, 20 over 12 is positive and negative 9/12 is negative. So they have different signs. So we're definitely going to have to subtract the numerators and take the sign of the bigger number. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to first subtract the numerators, so 20 minus 9, and 20 minus 9 equals 11, okay? So I get 11 on top. Then it says use the sign of the bigger number. In this case, 20 is bigger than 9 and 20 is positive, so our answer is going to be positive. We move on to step 4. We keep the denominator the same, which is 12, and we simplify if possible. In this case, 11/12 cannot be simplified, and we have our answer of positive 11/12. All right, let's move on to 2/3 plus 1/6. So for 2/3 and 1/6, we go back to step 1, find our common denominators because the denominators are different. So we need to find the least common multiple, right? The smallest number that both 3 and 6 go into. So I'm going to have my 3 and I'm going to have my 6. And we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now I'm going to write out my multiples. And the multiples of 3, so 3 times 1 is 3, 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 4 is 12. I'm now going to do it for the number 6. And if we don't have any numbers in common, then we're going to go out on our chart even further and do times 5, times 6, times 7, however far we need to go until we find the smallest number they both have in common. So for 6, we have 6 times 1, which is 6, 6 times 2, which is 12, 6 times 3, which is 18, 6 times 4, which is 24. And I look and I see, okay, so, do they have any numbers that are in common or the same? And if we look, we notice that 3 goes into 6 and 6 goes into 6, right? 6 times 1 is 6, 3 times 2 is 6. That's the smallest number that they both have in common. You will notice that they also have 12 in common, but 6 is smaller than 12. And remember, we need the smallest number they have in common, the least common multiple. So the smallest number that they both go into, that's the same, okay? Now that we have that, we can go ahead and convert our fractions. So let's do negative 2/3. We need to turn that so that it has a 6 on the bottom. So what do we do to that 3 to make it into a 6? Well, we multiplied it by 2. So whatever I did at the bottom, I'm going to do at the top. And 2 times 2 is negative 4. For 1/6, it already has a 6 on the bottom, so it's good to go. We don't have to do anything. And our two fractions are going to end up being negative 4/6 plus 1/6. Now that our fractions are converted, we can move on to step 3, which is add numerators, or if the fractions have different signs, subtract the numerators and use the sign of the bigger number. So in this case, 4/6 is negative and 1/6 is positive. So yeah, we definitely have different signs. So we're going to go ahead and subtract them. So 4 minus 1 is 3. So this turns into a 3. The larger number between the 4 and the 1 is the 4. And it's negative, so that means our answer will be negative. Okay, we move on to step 4, which says keep the denominator, so we're going to keep that 6. And then step 5 says simplify if you can. Well, in this case, we can simplify, right? Because 3 is a factor of 6. 3 goes into 6 2 times. So that means I can divide both numbers by 3, and I end up with negative 3 goes into 3 one time. Oopsie, sorry. And 3 goes into 6 2 times, and you get negative half. So that's D. Now, to make sure that you guys understand, I've included 2 more examples, A and B. Okay? And what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video, try to solve A and B, and then when you're done, restart the video and see if you got the correct answer. And if not, see how I did them so you know what to do next time. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video now. All right, welcome back. Okay, so for A, we have 5/6 plus 3/8. So the first thing I have to do is see, do we have a common denominator? No, we don't. Both denominators are different. They're not common. So I'm going to have to go to step 1, find a common denominator. So I'm going to have to find the least common multiple. So I have 6 and I have 8. Okay, and I'm going to multiply by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now I find my multiples. 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12, 6 times 3 is 18, 6 times 4 is 24, 6 times 5 is 30. Okay, remember, this is like we're making a little chart to find the least common multiple. You could even make a box if it helps you solve these types of problems. Okay, now I'm going to do my 8s. 8 times 1 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 8 times 3 is 24, 8 times 4 is 32, and 8 times 5 is 40. So now I have to look and see, do I have any numbers that are the same for both? And we need the smallest one. Well, 8 doesn't go into 6, 8 doesn't go into 12, 8 doesn't go into 18, but 8 does go into 24. So 24 is our least common multiple. Okay, now I can move on to step 2, convert the fractions. So I have my 5/6, and I have my -3/8, and I'm going to convert them so that they have 24 on the bottom. Now for 5/6, I go, okay, what did I multiply 6 by to get 24? I multiply by 4. So whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. 5 times 4 is 20. Now for 8 to become 24, it multiplied by 3. So 8 times 3, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. -3 times 3 is -9. Okay. Now that my fractions have been converted, I can go to step 3. And step 3 says, add numerators, or if fractions have different signs, subtract the numerators and use the sign of the bigger number. Okay, so if we have 20/24 plus -9/24, they definitely have different signs. 20/24 is positive, -9/24 is negative. So we're going to have to subtract the numerators, right, and keep the sign of the bigger number. So 20 minus 9 is 11. Okay. The 20 is positive, so our answer is going to be positive, right? 20 is the bigger number, so, and it's positive, so our answer is going to be positive. And then we keep the denominator, so it's going to be 11/24. The last step is to simplify if you can. 11/24 is simplified as low as it will go, and that's our answer, 11/24. Okay, let me go ahead and draw a line separating the sides. And let's move on to B. 4/9 plus 1/12. Different denominators, so we have to find our least common multiple. we're going to have our 9 and we're going to have our 12. I'm going to go ahead and make that chart again so you can easily see what I'm referring to. So, in this case, I'm going to multiply by 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if I need more boxes, I can add more boxes. So, 9 times 1 is 9, 9 times 2 is 18, 9 times 3 is 27, 9 times 4 is 36. Now I'm going to do my 12s. 12 times 1 is 12, 12 times 2 is 24, 12 times 3 is 36, 12 times 4 is 48. And I look to see, so far, do we have a common denominator or a least common multiple, or do I need to extend that chart further and do times 5, times 6, times 7, whatever? Well, 12 doesn't go into 9, 12 doesn't go into 18, 12 doesn't go into 27, but 12 does go into 36. So that's going to be our least common multiple and our new denominator. So now I can go ahead and move on to step 2, which is convert our fractions. So we have 4 over 9 and we have -1 over 12. And we want them so that there is a 36 on the bottom. So what times 9 gave us 36? 9 times 4 did. And whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So 4 times 4 is 16. What times 12 gives us 36? 12 times 3 does. Whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So 1 times 3 is 3, and we get -3 over 36. Okay? So we end up with 16 over 36 plus a -3 over 36. They have different signs because that 3 is negative and the 16 is positive. So we're going to have to do the, if fractions have different signs, subtract the numerators and use the sign of the bigger number. So I'm going to subtract my numerators, 16 minus 3, and I get 13. Okay, so that's 13 on top. The bigger number is 16, and 16 is positive, so my answer is going to be positive. And then we move on to the next step, which is keep the denominator. So we're going to keep that 36 on the bottom. Last but not least, simplify if you can. There is nothing more we can do to simplify it, so the answer is 13 over 36. So if you got A and B correct, go ahead and give yourself a pat on the back. And as always, if you need more help, if you're confused or have any questions, please come see me during office hours. Hope you have a good day.